Chapter 6. Kate rubbed her eyes as the sunlight streamed through the window opposite her. She wanted to roll over and fall back to sleep, but every part of her body ached from the hard wooden bed. "Good morning, Kate. How did you sleep?" Ah, yes. Ellen was the inconsiderate neighbor who had lifted her shade at whatever ungodly hour it was. "Not as well as I'd hoped," Kate said, pushing herself into a seated position. "How do people travel on these things for days on end? I need a decent bed and a washing in the worst way." Ellen smiled. "I suppose when you have lived as long as I have, you will have slept on a myriad of beds, some more comfortable than others. I find I can sleep almost anywhere now because of it." "Did you move often?" Kate asked. She had only ever lived in the house with her parents, and then the house with Robert, and both had been of adequate standards. They might not have been rich, but they had actual beds and wash basins that were filled daily. "Well, I was originally born in England. We moved to the United States when I was about 25. Unfortunately, my husband had a hard time finding work, and we were forced to move a few times until he could find a steady job. I didn't mind it as much, but my daughter never adjusted to the multiple moves. And when she was old enough, she moved west with her husband in hopes of finding a permanent home. I have only been out there once before, but she seemed happy." "I thought you said this was your first time on a train," Kate said, confused. Ellen laughed and sat next to Kate. "That is true. The last time I went, I had to make the whole journey by stagecoach. It was a long and dusty journey, and I much prefer the train." "How long did it take by stagecoach?" Kate asked. "Weeks," Ellen said, with a shake of her head and a nostalgic smile. "And while I'll still have to take a stagecoach to get to Sage Creek, it will be a much shorter journey this time. I do believe there is a wash basin on board this train, if you would like to venture with me to find it." "I would love that," Kate said as she touched her hair. It was no longer in the position she had placed it yesterday before leaving, and she felt grimy. While she was not sure she could fix her hair without a proper mirror, she could at least wash the dirt from her face and hands. As the other passengers in the sleeping car began to stir, the two women made their way down the aisle in search of a place to clean up. Jesse stood a respectful distance from the gravesite, though he wanted to be up front. After all, Pauline had nearly been his wife. James had made it abundantly clear that Jesse was neither wanted nor welcome up front with the family. And so he stood, with his hat in his hands at the back, feeling very much like an outsider. "Pauline's life was taken far too early," Pastor Lewis said from the front. "But we have to remember that God has a plan for everything. We often do not know why things happen, but He does. Remember that He knows of every hair on your head, and He has a purpose for everything He allows to happen. That does not mean we cannot mourn Pauline, for she was a dear sister, daughter, and friend to all of us. But we know that she is in a better place with no suffering and pain. For that we can rejoice." He paused and looked out over the small crowd gathered. "Is there anyone who would like to say a word on Pauline's behalf, or share a story from memory?" Jesse wanted to barge his way to the front. He had so many memories of Pauline. The way she smiled at him when he entered a room. The way her laugh sounded musical, like the bells they sometimes played in church at Christmas. Or the way her hand felt like the finest silk. but no one wanted to hear these memories. And if he were honest, Jesse didn't want to share these memories with the people here either. He wanted to tuck them inside and hold them close to his heart. When Rebecca, Pauline's childhood friend, stepped forward, Jesse knew it was time for him to go. There was nothing more he could do here, and listening to other people's memories of Pauline wouldn't fill the hole in his heart. Glad for once he was at the back, Jesse slipped quietly away from the gravesite. He had tied Molly up to a tree out of sight, and he headed that direction. She was happily munching on some grass when he approached, blissfully unaware of the sadness around her. As he rode back to his homestead, Jesse wondered about his future. Of course, he would do nothing until he avenged her death. But after that, what? He had stayed in Sage Creek for Pauline. With her gone, should he pull up roots and find a new home? Kate was especially glad she had made a friend in Ellen when the train pulled into the final station and they were forced to switch to the stagecoach. Though it was her first time as well, Ellen seemed to know what to do and whom to talk to in order to make sure their trunks were pulled off the train and loaded onto the correct stagecoach. It made Kate wonder if there were some books she should have read before making the trip. "How do you know how to do all of this?" Kate asked, as her curiosity got the better of her. Ellen laughed as she gathered her bag. "I asked a friend who made a trip a few months ago. I figured the process could not have changed that much in that short amount of time. Although it feels like technology is changing every day. One day, I believe we will have some form of transportation even faster than a train." "That would be something," Kate agreed, "though I cannot see how it would work. Even trains are expensive. How would we ever afford something faster?" "Well, that is what I said about trains before they became more prevalent. But look at me now." Kate nodded and followed Ellen off the train and to the platform where their trunks had been unloaded. "Where would you ladies like these taken?" the porter asked them. "You can place them over at the stagecoach office," Ellen said, pointing to a smaller building off to the left that had a similar platform to the train station. "Yes, ma'am," the man said, and began hefting their trunks toward the building. "Shall we check in?" Ellen asked. Kate nodded, but her attention was focused on the town around her. It was very different from Boston. The town seemed painted in a single hue of brown. There were few trees to add any color, and while there were buildings, they were all single stories, whereas some of the buildings back home were several stories tall. "Kate, are you coming?" Ellen asked, placing a black-gloved hand on Kate's arm. "Oh, yes, sorry," Kate stammered. "I was just struck by how different it is here." She followed Ellen to the stagecoach office where Ellen purchased her ticket, and Kate redeemed the pass she had been sent. "Well, it looks like we have a few minutes before the coach arrives," Ellen said. "Would you like to look around?" Kate nodded. Her body was not used to being in an enclosed space for such a long time, and she longed to stretch the kinks out of her legs. The women continued up the main street, passing the general store, the clinic, and the saloon before turning around. By the time they reached the stagecoach office again, the stagecoach was just pulling up. "Perfect timing," Ellen said with a smile. "Now we just have a few more hours on the road." Kate sighed at the thought. The train hadn't been extremely comfortable, but at least they had been able to stand up and move around. The stagecoach would have no such amenities. "You ladies have your tickets?" the driver of the stagecoach asked as they approached. "Yes, sir," Ellen said, and handed over her ticket. Kate followed suit. "All right," he said after looking them over. Do you have any other baggage?"
"Yes, those trunks."
Ellen pointed to the trunks sitting against the wall of the stagecoach office. The driver nodded. "That's fine. I'll load them up. My name is Thomas. I'm going to check and see if we have any more passengers or a shotgun messenger. We don't often ride without one."
"Does that mean we could be stuck here?"
Kate asked, as Thomas stepped into the stagecoach office. She had a little extra money, but she hadn't planned on having to stay at many inns along the way.
"I don't know, but I'm sure they'll work it out."
Ellen tried to sound brave, but Kate didn't miss the uncertainty in her voice or the look of concern that crossed her face. Thomas reemerged from the office with one stern woman and one mousy man following him. The man was continually pushing spectacles up the bridge of his nose. Kate hoped he wasn't their shotgun messenger, as she wasn't sure he could hit the broad side of a barn.
"Are we not still missing one person?"
Kate asked. "No, it turns out we won't have a shotgun messenger on this trip, as we aren't carrying a strongbox." Kate wasn't sure whether that made her feel better or worse. With no strongbox, hopefully they wouldn't be a target for robbers, but the extra protection of the shotgun rider would have been nice. "All right, everyone, I will load up this last baggage and we'll get on our way."
"Norman, help him out, why don't you?"
the stern-faced woman said to the mousy man.
"It looks like he has it, love, and besides, my back, you know."
He pushed the spectacles up again as he spoke. The woman rolled her eyes.
"Well, then help me inside."
"Yes, love," the man said. He opened the coach door and held out his hand for the woman to help her up. Then he scrambled up behind her. Ellen raised her eyebrows at Kate, who was forced to cover her mouth to keep from giggling. "All ready, ladies?" Thomas asked as he approached them.
"Yes, thank you,"
Ellen said, as she took his hand and climbed in the stagecoach. Kate followed suit, and then the door closed behind her. The interior of the coach surprised Kate. It was covered in a dark plush fabric and could seat 4 people comfortably. The stern woman and Norman had taken the far seat, so Kate sat next to Ellen.
"This is not that bad,"
Kate began, but her words were cut short when the coach lurched forward and she was thrown back against the seat.
"You were saying?"
Ellen asked, her lips pulling up into a grin. Kate shook her head.
"That should teach me to speak too soon." "I abhor these contraptions," the woman said. "But they are slightly better than traveling by horseback."
"Thankfully, we don't have far to go, love," the man said. "We're going to Belleville to visit my sister," he added for Ellen and Kate.
"I don't see why she couldn't just come to us,"
the woman harumphed. Kate and Ellen shared another smirking glance, and then the ride evened out. Kate became accustomed to the rhythm of the swaying coach. Though occasionally bumpy, the ride itself wasn't much worse than the train. However, the plume of dirt that resided out their window made it nearly impossible to see the passing scenery. "While the accommodations are not that bad," Kate said, "I cannot imagine making the entire trip from Boston this way." Ellen smiled and nodded.
"Yes, it was quite a long trip, to be sure. I much prefer the train, where at least there is a privy and a place to clean up." "I much prefer not to take such trips at all," the woman said. The conversation halted after that, and Kate's mind turned to her future. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when the coach stopped suddenly. Kate looked to Ellen. "Are we there already? That seemed awfully fast." Ellen's eyes were wide as she shook her head and placed a finger to her lips in a shushing motion. There was a commotion outside, and then the door of the coach opened. Ellen and the stern woman gasped
as it was not the friendly face of their driver. The face of the man was covered by a red cloth. Only his eyes were visible, and they were a clear blue and as cold as ice.
"Hey, boss, we got a group of women in here," the man said.
"I am not a woman," Norman began, but the woman elbowed him and he shut his mouth. Not in time, though, as he drew attention from the robber at the door.
"Correction, 3 women and 1 man. Bring 'em out and make sure they grab all of their things," a voice hollered back. "You heard the boss," the masked man said. "Grab your things and get on out."
Kate wanted to refuse, but the gun the man brandished as he motioned them to get out kept her mouth shut. Grabbing her bag, she stood and stepped down from the coach. Kate bit her lips together as she spied the driver face down in the dirt. She thought she could just barely make out the rise and fall of his chest, but she worried how they would continue without a driver.
"Don't worry, he'll be fine as long as he stays down."
As Kate looked up at the man on the horse who had spoken, he pulled his black hat even lower on his eyes. A similar cloth covered his face, and the only defining characteristic Kate could identify was the sling over his right shoulder. He appeared to have been injured recently. Ellen climbed down beside Kate, and the 2 women clasped hands. The stern woman and Norman followed Ellen and stood on the other side of the door.
"Those bags all you have?" the man on horseback asked,
as he gestured at the traveling bags clutched in their hands. Kate knew he could see their trunks from his vantage point on the steed and guessed he was testing them. "We each have a trunk," she said, pulling her shoulders back to present a brave front.
"You're a smart girl," the man said,
and though Kate couldn't see his face, she would have sworn he was smiling. "Mine holds mainly my clothes," she said, "nothing of value."
"I didn't ask you what they held, girl."
The man's voice had turned into a snarl.
"Whether there is value in them or not is for us to determine."
Their trunks thudded to the ground, followed by a third masked robber. The woman moaned as one trunk popped open and spilled its contents across the ground. Norman shushed her and pulled her closer to his side.
"Relieve them of their bags," the man on horseback ordered,
and the first man snatched their bags from their hands. He loaded up the saddlebags on one horse.
"Get those other trunks open," the leader said to the third man, "and let's see what's in there."
The man on the ground obeyed and rifled through the couple's trunk that had opened on impact. He held up a wad of money before shoving it in a pouch and turning to Ellen's trunk. Dresses and jewelry went flying out of her trunk as he opened the lid and knocked it over. The robber snatched up her jewelry, shoving it in a pouch, and flung the rest of the clothes to the side. Kate felt Ellen stiffen beside her, and a glance out of the corner of her eye showed the older woman biting her lip. Kate's trunk fared no better fate. He flipped the lid open, and Kate cringed when he grabbed her mother's brooch and shoved it into the pouch. She watched, helpless, as her other jewelry was added to his stash. But she could hold her tongue no longer when he held up her wedding dress. "Please," Kate said, "please let me keep my dress. I'm betrothed and supposed to be meeting my husband in Lisbon. Please do not make me get married in this." Kate motioned at the traveling dress she wore. The man on horseback walked his horse over until he was directly in front of Kate.
"Married, huh?"
She tried to keep her eyes on his to pretend she wasn't afraid of him, but his harsh gaze penetrated her thin wall of bravery, and she dropped her eyes. They landed on his left hand, which was holding the reins of his horse. A white scar in the shape of a crescent moon resided there. Though she was not sure what she would do with the information, she committed the image to memory.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want you wearing rags to your wedding.
The man laughed as he turned his horse away.
Let's ride, boys.
The men on the ground mounted their steeds after grabbing the remaining jewelry and money from Kate's trunk and the couple's trunk. As they rode out of sight, Kate hurried to the driver on the ground. There was a gash across his head, but it appeared shallow, more likely from the butt of the gun than anything else. With the tip of her skirt, she wiped the blood away.
I think he'll be okay, she said, turning to Ellen.
Ellen, however, was curled into a ball. Her arms were wrapped around her knees and she was rocking back and forth. As Kate hurried over, she noticed the other woman had fainted, and Norman was fanning her face. Kate wrapped her arm around Ellen.
It will be all right. It was only things.
It was everything I had, the older woman murmured.
We'll figure something out, Kate said,
although she also wondered how she was going to pay for any other incidentals. The woman woke first, but her stern words were gone, and she was content to let Norman stroke her hand. Kate picked up the contents of the trunks while they waited for Thomas to stir. The sun had shifted considerably in the sky when Thomas finally felt able to continue the journey. Though none of them felt comfortable continuing on, they feared for their safety even more if they stayed put, especially with evening approaching. After reloading the coach, Thomas helped the 4 subdued passengers back inside.
How far are we from Sage Creek?
Kate asked Thomas before he closed the door.
Another few hours. We're about an hour out of Belleville.
Let's stop and talk to the sheriff there in case the robbers come after the town. Do you think they would telegraph Sage Creek and Lisbon and let them know of our delay?
Yes, ma'am, he nodded. I'm sure they will.
With that, he closed the door, and Kate settled back against the seat.
How is it you appear so calm about all this?
Ellen asked, as the coach lurched forward again. Kate bit the inside of her lip as she thought about how to answer.
I wouldn't say that I'm calm. I'm as angry as a hornet and worried how I'm going to make it with no money. But I guess the difference is that I know Jesus is looking out for me. Even when I'm worried, he has a plan, so I'm trying to leave it in his hands. It's not like worrying helps solve the problem anyway.
Ellen sat back and regarded Kate.
I've never been one much for religion, but I think I'd like to hear more about this Jesus of yours.
Kate glanced over at the other couple, but when they didn't protest, she smiled and told Ellen of Jesus' love.